Hello, and welcome back to the Great American Movie Review, where we review great American movies.
My name is Kyle.
And I'm Micaiah. This is a Movie of the Week style podcast where we take turns picking films and we talk about their context and their quality. This week, I have selected the 1974 horror classic, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Before we continue, just housekeeping out of the way, because we've never brought it up on the show before, but I just figured it's important to bring up. I know we're an primarily audio formatted show, and if you prefer to listen on things like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, we are on there. So you can find us on there at Great American Movie Review. And yeah, be sure to, follow us on there so that you can watch us on the go.
Yeah, but we've got options as well. We're always going to remain on YouTube, I believe.
Yes, we'll always be on
And
YouTube.
and if that changes, we will let you know.
Yes. All right, but getting into it. So the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is basically it's a movie that you don't really need a description for necessarily. You read the title of it and you're like, there's a massacre, it's in Texas, and there's a
And it
chainsaw.
involves chainsaws. Yep.
And that
That's
is all
basic.
true.
Yep.
Basically, just there are some hippie teens, maybe young adult people, early 20s probably, driving down through Texas. A couple of them used to live here a long time ago, but they left for reasons that are not specified, but they're going to stop by and visit their childhood home, which is all dilapidated and everything. But while they're driving through, they're running out of gas, and they pick up a hitchhiker too, and then things just kind of start to get a little weird. And by start to get a little weird, I mean very suddenly gets very violent as they realize that maybe these neighbors that they're trying to get gas from are not so charitable. But movie's directed by Toby Hooper. His most famous movie, other than this, is probably Poltergeist, but he worked for a long time. He's been a staple of the horror genre through his whole career, really. But this movie had an extremely small budget. At the time, was only $140,000, which is absolutely tiny, and it became the most
Yep.
profitable independent movie of all time up to that point, making over $30 million in its original U.S. release, which made it the number 12 highest grossing film of that year. And to put that in context too, that was in today's dollars, that would be an $871,000 budget to make $186 million, which is absurd. Like, that's still like an under $1 million budget for a movie is tiny. That's your Independent Spirit Award certified easy, and uh
It's
yeah,
got to
to
be one of the biggest return on investments that I've
oh,
seen.
absolutely. I think that it only had this record for 4 years until Halloween came out in 1978,
Right.
which was obviously very heavily inspired by this. But yeah, like that, it kind of really spawned this style of horror genre. Like, within slashers technically existed before, like Psycho is, a lot of people kind of cite as the original slasher, and there were a couple other
Probably the
minor
modern
examples.
slasher, I guess.
This
Because of that,
redefined it. Yeah.
yeah, because of the Hays Code and everything like that, they couldn't
Yeah.
show much gore or anything like that. So they had slasher air quotes films that were just it was like the Night of the Hunter essentially, but
Right,
like tamer.
exactly. Yeah, because they couldn't show anything. So the Hays
No.
Code ended in 1968. We talked about the Hays Code a lot, actually, in our Night of the Hunter video. And so go check that out if you want to hear us talk more about that. But yeah, so the Hays Code, that the basically movies were either approved or not approved for theatrical distribution and everything. So basically everything wanted to be approved, and anything that wasn't, like, basically just got buried forever. But then in 1968 they changed the rating system to be more parent focused. This is where we got the modern rating system. Back then it was just it was G, PG, R, and X. And X was pretty much like not going to be released in theaters kind of films. And but
I mean, only
yeah.
only two films have been nominated for Best Picture that were rated X, and only one
Yep.
of them won. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's
They were very uncommon. X doesn't exist anymore.
very very
Yeah,
uncommon.
it got replaced by NC-17. basically nobody under 17 will be permitted into the theater, versus R, where like you have to be like accompanied still.
I
Um,
think I think Toby Hooper was also fighting for a PG rating for
oh
this movie,
yeah,
right?
it's a fascinating thing with this movie that Toby Hooper was apparently like he went to the MPAA and was like imploring to get a PG rating because he's like there's no blood, there's barely any blood in the whole movie,
Which
and
is true.
which is true. Like there is barely any blood in this movie, but
Gore,
when
yeah, gore wise, it's pretty tame, but I mean,
yeah.
it's definitely not tame on the horror
Oh,
aspects. So
absolutely not at all. So like there's no like it's laughable that he would ever think that he would get anything less than an R. Apparently its original rating was X and it got edited down to an R, but he was still going for the PG. Like the edits were an attempt to get PG, which is just really funny. I mean PG-13 didn't exist then, so he's never going to get that.
release the unrated cut.
But if this came out today, it would still be R, you know.
It definitely would.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing
If you
about it.
change nothing about it,
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't imagine anybody like thinking this was PG even at the
No.
time, especially at the time.
Yeah,
Man,
but I mean, this movie got banned in several countries around the world.
yeah, the UK didn't have it for a couple
For
decades, I think.
25 years, it was
Yeah.
banned in the UK, and then it was like the theatrical version was like the original version was technically banned in Germany from theatrical distribution until 2011.
Well, that's not hard to do. In order to get banned in Germany, I imagine that was West Germany then. East
um,
Germany probably didn't give it the time of day.
I mean, yeah, but then by 2011, you know, I feel like they should have sorted that out by then. But
Well, they had borders to sort out, that kind of
there's
thing.
plenty of other places, even in the U.S., where it got banned for stretches of time. And
So does
yeah,
that mean most? I guess all the gross box office came from the U.S. then, or at
yes,
least North
because I
America.
mean, as far as box office grosses, once again, like the mid 70s is really when box
Take it
office
with a grain of
tracking.
salt.
Yeah, box office tracking only started in the mid 70s, officially, and then the worldwide box office honestly didn't become a major sticking point for filmmakers and what Hollywood made films for and considered, you know, their grosses for until um like probably honestly the late 90s to the mid 2000s kind of is where that actually kind of blew up and became the most like we actually look at the worldwide box office. But yeah, so that's
Makes
from its
sense
original US release was the 30 million that it grossed, which I mean, once again, that's just it's a
because
massive
I think
take.
yeah, some sources have it like ranging from 30 to 40 million,
Yeah. Yeah,
which
it's weird
either one of
too.
those numbers is insane.
Yeah, it's this movie has a really fascinating actually distribution situation that happened with it that is its own thing that would be interesting to like look into. But
Yeah,
apparently the original distributor turned out to be a mafia front. And it was
it was the
used
70s. I
yeah,
mean,
it was used to launder
par for the
profits.
course.
It was used to launder profits
Par for the
from
course.
made from the movie Deep Throat, which is a massively like influential film. Obviously, you've heard the term deep throat within
Yep.
politics.
Yeah,
That's yeah,
as far as I know, that specific pornographic movie had the biggest return on investment of any movie ever.
yes. Well,
It was like
yeah,
$50,000 to make, and it made like 22 million. So
right.
or something crazy like that.
So yeah, but apparently, yeah, it was got caught up in this weird money laundering scheme with the mafia, and they, um, so the people behind it, the distribution lied about the gross income or in the gross for the movie, and so it wasn't until years later when they filed lawsuits against him and, um, they were awarded their fair due years later. Yeah, it's kind of a bizarre situation just in and of itself with that.
It's pretty crazy for a documentary of just the day in the life in Texas. It's
Oh yeah.
kind of strange.
I
It's
mean,
amazing how
yeah,
Toby Hooper got so many great shots of just random Texans.
absolutely.
That's
Um,
so strange.
though to me, this is an all-time horror classic. I mean, that's not like a controversial thing to say. This is widely considered to be that,
I don't think
but
so. Yeah, everything I've heard from this movie going into it, I mean, yeah, it defined the horror genre, or at least
yeah,
it pioneered it.
because I only watched this for the first time a couple years ago, and it's really interesting because I got really into slashers with like um a few years before then, because I mentioned in the Iron Giant video when we were talking about that that I was scared of everything as a kid. I didn't even finish watching the Iron Giant because I got too scared. So after a period of time in my life, something just kind of switched off, and suddenly like that stuff didn't bother me anymore. And so this was kind of really in college. Once again, like a lot of my influences in film kind of came from like greater exploration that I did once I got to college. And I watched all of the Friday the 13th movies and then got really into the slasher genre for a bit. But that genre is so full of tropes and cliches and just so many just trashy movies.
Yeah, I've seen my fair share. I don't know the ones offhand except for like Scream. I've seen a
Yeah.
bunch of the scary movies, which if we're talking about tropes, the scary movie franchise just takes the tropes and makes them the entire plot. So,
Yeah.
yeah. I what is it? This movie was the first instance of a final girl, or it
It
had to have
not
been like the
I
first
wouldn't say
few.
it was the first instance of a final girl, but it this movie really
Psycho kind of has
cements.
one, but it's not exactly a final girl.
Right. That's why it's arguable, I
Yeah.
would say, but it definitely, I mean, there's definitely a final girl in this movie, and that
Yeah.
became this movie set up those tropes to the point where when I watched this movie, I was just kind of expecting it to be just like those other ones, you know? But it ended up I was pretty shocked by it because it's so much more like horrific than those movies are. Those movies are campy and goofy, occasionally good and scary, but like
But
most of the time,
this doesn't feel like a slasher so much as a like a slaughterhouse movie,
I mean, it has
because
that vibe.
yeah, the main monster doesn't come in to play, and then it immediately just like literally hits you over the head with just the entrance of him.
Yeah,
It's pretty much just a stroll down Texas, a Texan highway,
yeah.
meeting random creepy folks along the way, and then suddenly one of the teenagers breaks into the house and then immediately just gets killed for it.
Oh yeah, this
And then it
is
picks up from there. It like switches to a different movie midway through.
absolutely like it's literally 35 minutes into the movie where you're just following these teenagers going down the road. They pick up the hitchhiker who's extremely off-putting and strange, and like he cuts Franklin, the guy in the
Mm-hmm.
wheelchair, and then he cuts his own hand, and they kick him out of the place, and he marks their van with his blood. Um, but that's like the most eventful thing to happen in the first
It's good to know
35
that James
minutes.
Franco was always a weird guy.
What?
I'm sorry, the hitchhiker looks like James Franco to me.
Oh, I was like, what are you saying right now? I think that,
Apparently, he was a Vietnam vet though,
yeah, apparently.
and he hated the fact that he said he'd rather go back to Vietnam than film this movie again.
Yeah, this movie, so with its budget the way it
It
was,
was a mess to film.
yeah, it was apparently only supposed
It
to
was
be two
brutal.
weeks, but they shot it over 4 weeks because the Texas heat and everything, and apparently they were working like really long days, and they were
Yeah,
in the middle of Texas. They didn't have
it
proper
was a heat
ventilation.
surge. Yep.
Yep, all of the animal carcasses are real in the
Yep.
movie, which just made it like a really stinky, like terrible environment for sets. Costumes couldn't be changed because they weren't able, like some of them were dyed, like Leatherface's costume specifically was dyed, and he wasn't allowed to wash it. So throughout the 4 week shoot, which they're working out in the sun every day, like he had
Especially
to wear
that
the
dinner scene.
same. Yeah, the dinner scene. Oh my gosh, that's one of the like
Apparently
that's
some
like
of
a
the
pinnacle of
injuries
horror scene.
apparently some of the injuries are real, like Sally getting
Oh
her
yeah,
finger cut was real. They just cut
yeah.
her
That's
finger
yeah.
because they couldn't bother with like actually getting fake blood for it.
Well, apparently, so the guy who played, there's been a lot of talk from the cast about this movie over the years.
Yeah.
On the Blu-ray that I have, there's four different commentary tracks with various members of the production team and cast, just like on different parts of it.
This is
You
why
know,
it's just a regular like couple weeks in Texas because everyone has their own story for it. There's
right?
like
But
there
apparently, the guy who played Leatherface said that they were really going kind of crazy in that room with all of the rotting food and the rotting animal carcasses and the heat and just like the long working conditions. He was wearing a mask the whole time, and he said that when he was supposed to like have this like thing working to make the blood work on her finger, but it was getting clogged, and he was just feeling crazy, and like he actually wanted to harm her because he was in the headspace of the character while like breathing in these fumes, and so he actually cut her finger. It was just like messed up.
And imagine if Jared Leto was there.
Oh
Oh, he would go absolutely berserk.
yeah,
Oh no.
don't let Jared Leto near
Thank
a
goodness they
Texas
didn't have
Chainsaw
method
movie.
actors there.
Right. Well, actually, apparently the guy who played Franklin was kind of method, and uh, everybody hated him because he was complaining about everything, even when the movie wasn't
I
funny.
hated him, and I only met him for 30 minutes.
I know. He's the most annoying character in the movie for sure. He's
They called him
always
quote unquote
complaining.
invalid, which I assumed he
They
was going.
did.
I didn't know it was just going to mean he was paraplegic, but
Yeah.
like he doesn't have to act like a dick all the time.
Right. Which the movie famously opens with John Larroquette's narration basically laying out that this was based on a true story, and which it isn't. It's inspired loosely by various true things,
Yeah,
but not directly connected to any kind of true
yeah.
story.
Like
But it's actually
there's a '60s or '70s guy who would famously dig up uh, dead bodies in order to turn them into furniture. So that's where that came from.
yeah, Ed
So it's
Gein
just a bunch.
was
Yeah,
his
Ed
name.
Gein. It was just a bunch of like scary stories all mixed into one.
Yeah, with like Hooper's own kind of like his own experiences in life with violence and stuff. Apparently, he was present for the Charles Whitman mass murder at the University of
Oh
Texas in
yeah.
the 60s. Apparently, he was present for that. Um, so like, and he
Did
just
he
grew up
do
in
it?
Texas hearing stories. No, he didn't do it.
I mean, you don't know
But
that. You never
uh,
saw him and Whitman in the same room, did you?
I don't want to accuse anybody of that who didn't do it. But um, when I was looking up, is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in the National Film Registry? But when I
Is
searched
it?
is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the first the first thing that popped up was, is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre still alive?
Oh.
Because people still think that this is based on a true story,
Oh, of
which is
course they
kind of
do.
crazy to me.
Yeah, that's purely based off the narration because the narration is just so
Yeah,
strange to
I
put it in
mean,
place.
and each of the following
That probably
movies
sold
still
tickets
uses
though.
that too. Oh,
That probably sold
absolutely it
tickets.
did.
Everyone thinking it
That
was
is
real.
part of yeah, that's part of why it actually became a hit, because of the true story angle that they went with in the marketing. And people
Clever
just believed it. I
bastards.
mean, it was the 70s. It was a period of time where it's like Vietnam was, happening,
It's
and
also only 5 years after Helter Skelter and Charles Manson, so that
yep,
makes sense
yep.
in a way.
There's
Everyone believed
complete yeah.
John Wayne
Yeah,
Gacy, Ted Bundy. It was the height of serial killers and like mass
yep.
hysteria.
Mm-hmm. And on top of that, then you have the dismissal of like the Hayes Code and the new rating system, which allows for a lot more creative flexibility with for filmmakers and what they're able to show on screen,
Yeah,
and still get distribution for it.
and the things
And
that
it
people didn't
just
know from the news, they knew from movies. So
yeah. So you just kind of have a perfect storm of these things just kind of allowing something like this to come into the world, and not just come into the world, but actually like make an impact and be an extremely popular film.
basically, what you're saying is all '70s people are gullible. I see it.
That's not what I'm saying.
I got you. You're inferring it, or
Yeah.
sorry, I'm inferring that from that implication that you're putting through. It's
If
okay.
you want to
It's okay,
take it there,
Micaiah. I
Kyle, that's
agree.
fine.
Oh, trust me, I took it there 5 seconds ago.
But so me picking this movie, I was
Yeah, why did you pick this
honestly,
movie?
I picked it because once again we're in October now, based on when this comes out, and
Yeah, don't
um,
date this episode.
and
I don't want people knowing what time of the year I'm at.
oh yeah, and uh, it's I wanted to start us off within the horror genre with a real bang, just something that I think is an all-timer. Also, I was really curious what you would think about it because it's not the type of thing that you usually go for. It's not like a
No,
writing
and I'll
heavy, it's
tell
not
you
an
why.
acting heavy movie.
I'll tell you why. The reason why I don't go for slasher movies is because I find myself rooting for the slasher so often because the people who are the tropes and the characters that aren't the slasher are so dumb that I want them to die. And
That
this movie is no
is
exception.
Oh, okay. So for me, that is absolutely true for the most part in these movies. The good ones, I'll root for the person who's the hero because I want them to get away.
I cannot like I can't even count on one hand how many times I've seen a slasher or a horror movie
Yeah,
where I wanted
it's
the
a
heroes to live.
it's a rare thing. Usually, I am
No,
rooting for like Jason. I consider to be the hero. He's the arbiter of justice in those films. He's
sure.
removing sin from the world. um, but in this one, like I said, it
Killing
kind of
kids, you
turned it.
mean? That's why
Yeah.
you like it.
I mean, they're young adults.
No, that doesn't matter to Jason.
There's only one Friday the 13th movie that actually takes place during the time where the campers are actually there, like the kids. So usually it takes place in the first like week when they're getting set up
And that's
before
the
the
only one
kids.
that you can watch and enjoy.
But the kids don't die in that one, so
Yes,
you're
but
like,
the possibility, it's the potential of it.
I mean, maybe you're right. I mean, that's also the silliest Friday the 13th
No,
for sure.
the reason why I like this movie specifically is because of the fact that it's a simple story, good or bad. It's simple. The stakes are simple. It's only 5 dead bodies at the end of it.
Yep.
So it's got the lowest amount of stakes possible. It's a very very short movie, which for a slasher movie that is a positive. Because if they
Yes.
drone on and unless they are building up the characters for me to find them either relatable or likable or both, um, it's just filler. So I like that it even though it's a little bit slow for the first 30 minutes, I like the fact that it picks up the pace and doesn't stop.
Oh, once it hits that 35-minute mark,
Yeah, it's gone.
it's like you have your five people, but it's literally just
I think
so you
Sally
get
runs a half marathon in that in
yeah,
that
you get
like 50 minutes.
the first guy going in the house and he just gets clubbed immediately and he's just twitching on the floor and that's
Yeah,
all
he
you
gets
get
hit
of that.
twice and then he's done.
Yep. And then you get his girlfriend in that excellent
Which can
iconic
I really,
dolly shot.
real quick, just bring up? So Kirk and Pam like looked at Franklin and were like, "We're going down to the watering hole. We'll see you in an hour." And I looked at them and like, "No, you're 35 minutes in. Your hour's up. There's only 50
Yep.
minutes left of this movie. Sorry, bud, you're done."
Yeah, which yeah, you get that excellent shot, the low angle shot with the panning camera,
Yeah, the
Pam getting
the
off the
dolly.
swing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it goes through the camera goes through the shot goes through the swing,
you got
through and
through the
underneath the
swing,
swing.
underneath the swing, and
Hmm.
then getting up to her, just like it kind of really because at this point, when Kirk goes in there and gets killed, you don't really know what's gonna happen. It's very sudden, you know.
Well, it's all very matter of fact. It just shows the hallway for 2 shots, and then like
Yeah,
you hear the pig squealing, and then that's when Pam's like, "Ah, nah, I'm out of here."
which this
But
movie doesn't really have score. It just kind of has animal
sound
sounds every once in
effects,
a
yeah,
while.
and like the iconic sound effect of like Leatherface showing his face.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such an iconic shot because it's like literally the stakes are set
Hmm.
and then the next scene is her walking towards the house now and it just has the house suddenly has this extremely imposing nature to it and
Yeah,
as she's like approaching it and the low angle shot is just perfect for it and then yeah you get her just going in there and then she just gets put on a meat hook immediately.
well, no, you're skipping the fact that so she goes to the like living room where the couch is. The
Yes, she
couch
falls over.
is she falls into that. That is some of the best horror imagery that I've ever
Absolutely.
seen.
It's just chicken feathers
It's just
and
chicken feathers,
bones.
bones, and then you see skulls. You see the couch made of a dead person. You see live
Yep.
chickens.
Yep.
Yeah, that's pretty insane.
It really this movie has this idea that human beings are just a meat and animals to be killed and slaughtered and consumed. This is secretly You don't realize it right away, but it's a cannibal film.
Yeah.
And so you get the barbecue place that they're offered and they're munching on, which makes this movie just so much. The first part of this movie is not as slow the second time you watch it, because there's just
Sure.
like suspense and kind of disgust at them like eating the barbecue, which is human meat. And like it's like, ugh, gross. And um then it kind of increases the tension and the escalation the second time, which this is the rare horror movie for me that actually gets more like frightening the more you know about it. Most horror movies, the more you know, the sillier it becomes, or like the mystery's
I
gone.
think
So
that's because there's tension, but
yeah,
there's no build up for the monster
yeah,
until you know what's coming. So I was always on edge because I knew that a monster was coming eventually, but I didn't know when, I didn't know how, and I didn't know like how far into the movie.
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, which I mean, he does a very clever thing with the editing in this movie, where partly, I mean, it
It's a
may have
lack of
been,
editing in some cases. It's just
well, what he did,
long shots for days with just the cinematography, like
yes,
showing the van driving off or showing the van just driving across a field, or just showing like long silences of the hitchhiker and the five teens.
yeah, but then also because you get some films always have a rhythm to them, and you never really like good films. Within the editing, there's some sort of rhythm. There is some understanding of like shot length and the compositions and everything. And this movie really plays with that
Mm-hmm.
because using it to heighten the intensity of the scenes, because what he did is he cut some frames before each of like any kind of action or scary thing. He would cut a few frames to make it even more sudden, and he would intentionally have like there's the scene where Franklin gets killed, where Franklin's kind of on the right side of the screen. And then when it cuts to the Leatherface suddenly out of there, one, it's already got those frames cut off, so it's even more sudden. And two, he's on the left side of the screen, so your eyes like jump to the other side. It just kind of, it's not jump scares using sound effects, it's jump scares using visual language,
Right.
which is terrific.
The only thing I'll add to that is I agree with you and I see what you mean, like with the suddenness of the visuals. But the editing also leads to many more shots and cuts than there need to be for the action. Like I can point to specifically the first time Sally jumps out of the like top story window after meeting the grandfather and grandmother. Um, there are after the glass is broken, there are 14 cuts before Leatherface starts running down the stairs. So it's a full 25 seconds and 14 cuts of just Sally writhing on the ground and Leatherface just screaming out the window.
that
Which
works for me because of the discombobulation of all of it,
not
though.
the editing though, because there's a couple better ways to do that kind of editing without doing cut 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 cut. Okay, then he starts running.
I don't know. As far as like horror genre goes, this is to me like masterful editing through and through. And I think that the discombobulation brought about by like the editing choices and scenes like that, but even what you're talking about only enhances kind of the intensity for
If you
me.
call it discombobulation, I agree with you, but it took me right out of the horror aspect of it. It just made it funny to me.
I think there is some dark humor in here, but
Well, not dark humor,
okay.
straight up comedy.
Oh, okay.
Like
I see what you're saying.
I can point to like the Paranormal Activity movies. Like I find the the wife standing, you know what I'm talking about. For Paranormal Activity, the found footage or just like the camera on the ceiling just pointing down at the bed, the husband is sleeping, the wife stands up and it's time lapse of her just like for hours just standing there staring at him is the funniest thing I've seen in horror. And this is a little bit like that to me. It's not horror per se. Some people could find it terrifying, but man, is it
I don't know. I think the
it's
scene of
not
her
the way to
just
do editing. If you're
just
showing that kind of action, I don't see how 14 cuts was the plan.
I mean, part of that I'm sure comes into the budget, but I think that that works out because that's like one of the few like scenes where you had a stunt double do something. And so, but yeah, like the immediacy though of her just
Wait,
like running
you
through the
talking about
window.
like Sally's stunt double, like jumping through
Yeah,
the? Okay,
yeah,
only 2 cuts, and then she's on the ground.
yeah. And then
So
then the other cuts come.
then
Yeah.
the other 12 cuts are like her
Right,
writhing
but
on the
she just
ground.
jumped through a window, and yeah, the writhing on that worked for me. Like
Well, the writhing
those
is
cuts
fine. It's
absolutely.
it's it's the constant cut between like that kind of thing, and it's like showing the same movement over and over again.
I think we'll just have to agree to disagree on this one because I think that that works for the movie to me to increase its terror, but for you, it took you out of it.
Well, it does the same thing when Sally's running from Leatherface in the dark as well. It
Well,
does
it
the
also,
exact same
yeah,
thing.
and it does the same thing when she's even just in the chair, and it has a close up on her face as she's just kind of
That's
thrashing around.
different. That
Yeah,
is absolutely different. You know why? Because that shows different perspectives of both shots. That shows different perspectives of the Sawyer family, and it shows different perspectives of Sally. It shows her face, it shows the chair, it shows her eyes, it shows them.
yeah.
This
I still think it's
specifically just
effective.
shows her wriggling Leatherface, her wriggling Leatherface, her wriggling Leatherface. It's just the same shots for 25 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it once again it works for me. So like, I have no issues with it. It increases the intensity of it for me, but I understand what you're saying.
It could have been
And
done way better, is all I'm saying.
yeah, I mean, once again, that there's when you go into the production stuff of this movie, like the fact that it even turned out at all, let alone to me, I think as good as it does, is incredible because apparently during that whole nighttime chase scene like he like slipped and fell and like threw the chainsaw one time so he like had to like balance himself and they didn't have enough actual like space to like do the whole running scene the way that like because he was so much faster than her just because he's so much bigger and so they kept having to come up with ways for him to get kind of like slowed down but I think it works for like the strangeness of the Leatherface character and his clearly like because Leatherface is not this lumbering kind of like stalking kind of killer. No, he's a very just like brash,
He's
just
manic. Is the
very
is
manic. He's almost like a giant baby. Like he is a kid that was raised by the worst psychopaths you know and never developmentally grew beyond that but also grew into an
I
absolute
assume he's the
behemoth.
youngest of the family.
That seems to be the implication, but I
Yeah,
don't know for sure.
because we don't even get. I don't even know if the gas station owner, I don't know his name other than he's part of the Sawyer family. I don't even know if he's the father or if he's just an older brother.
Right. There's a point where he's like he mentions your brother over there or something like that, but it's so it makes him almost seem like the father, but it's never specified in the
He also
movie.
says, "Go get Grandpa." Where's the father if that's the case?
Right. Like it makes sense for him to be the father, I think. But yeah. Um which the grandpa so you see him up there in that attic and you're just like, "Oh my gosh, these corpses," you know, because you get him and her and then when it reveals in the dinner scene that grandpa was alive. It's
Yeah,
and with like the night like okay, let's just talk about the dinner scene while we're
sure.
here. So the dinner scene is probably the best and most horrific scene in the whole movie. And because you get so at this point Sally's completely alone. The other four people that she's with get picked off really quickly. By the 47th minute is when she's completely alone, and then the rest of the movie is just her like just trying to get out of there for her
Yeah,
life, which is why
Kirk and Jerry get hit in the head, so we know they're dead. Franklin gets
yeah,
chainsawed in half, so we know he's dead. The only thing is Pam, we don't know if she's like fully dead because she's in the freezer. She wakes
yeah,
up, but then she's put back in the freezer, so
but we
we
never get to go and
assume
see.
she's dead.
Yeah, we just assume she's dead.
Death by
And
freezer.
right. And so you just have Sally left and she's running and screaming and uh basically the whole movie from this point on is just yeah like I said her just trying to get out of there, her just screaming, but she gets so she ends up escaping from Leatherface kind of in a weird circumstance where he's suddenly not there anymore and she makes it to the gas station And then the gas station attendant who helped them earlier sold him barbecue, which seemed kind of nice at the time. Suddenly, not so nice. And he captures her, brings her back to the house. She's now strapped to a chair that has human arms for the arms of the chair.
Yep.
And and then they're like having family dinner with her. And they bring down Grandpa from upstairs, just like in his chair, and set him down. And they're like, he needs to feed or something, so they like cut her finger, and this is when you realize Grandpa's actually alive, because they stick her bloody finger in his mouth and he just starts sucking on it like
He just starts going to town on that finger.
it's so disturbing and gross. I'm like, this is so messed up. And
This is
they're
right out
like,
of Resident Evil 7. I don't know if you played that video game, but man,
I've not.
is it exactly like this?
I mean, that video game is heavily inspired by this, for
I have no
sure.
doubt.
And
It's just the Louisiana
yeah.
version of it.
Well, and then you get like because you get there's the slaughterhouse that a lot of people work at in this town with all the cows, and you get Franklin earlier describing how they use the hammer, and then they changed it to a gun, but then the hitchhiker says, "No, I gotta use the hammer. The hammer's the best." And they're like, they're gonna kill her now, and they're like, "Don't worry, we'll make it quick and painless." And they're like, "Let Grandpa do it. He's the best. He's always
Is
the best."
Hold on. Is this also the influence for Firmly Grasp It from SpongeBob? You know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about.
that'd be really funny if it was, like, if they thought about that.
I think
when
it
making
might
that
be.
episode.
I think it might be.
That'd be amazing if that came to light, that was the case. But yeah, they're like trying to put the hammer in his hand.
There's way
and
too
she's like,
many correlations for it not to have
oh yeah,
something
There's-
behind it.
yeah. She's like bent over in front of him with her head just like at the place where he can just bash it, but he can't grab the hammer. He's like,
He does hit
he's
her
so,
a couple
like,
times
old
though.
and messed
She
up.
she
He
does start
does, yeah.
bleeding. Well, I think
He
that's more
gets a
so
couple of
Leatherface though.
hits.
Leatherface is
he
kind of
gets a
like
couple
putting
hits.
Leatherface is kind of like putting his inertia into it or his force
Yeah.
into it. But yeah.
But they're like, Grandpa was the best. Never took more than one swing. Just this whole scene's like an absolute nightmare. And this movie's also important not just within the horror genre, but within the subgenre of horror of like exploitation and like just like redneck film cinema and grindhouse, all of these kind of things. It's just kind of this, once again, not very bloody. Like, they definitely avoided using a lot of blood in this movie, but honestly, in real life, you don't get spurts of blood usually, so it makes
depends.
sense. Well, yeah, it kind of
If
depends.
there's no
but, like, for, like,
arterial spray, then sure.
right, and this is mostly blunt force trauma. The
Yeah.
one actual chainsaw kill is in the dark, and so you don't really see that either.
Did the commentary go over that specifically?
I didn't listen to any of the commentaries.
Okay,
Actually, there were too
so
many to choose from, and I didn't have enough time.
I suppose the urban legend is the blood spurt is Toby Hooper and another guy just like spurting ketchup out of their mouths at Leatherface.
That would be incredible.
Yeah. It would be incredible, and I do not doubt that is real.
Yeah, this is one of those movies with like urban legends that I feel like most of them have turned out.
Most of them are probably true, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so that dinner scene she ends up getting out of there, getting free from them, and then crashes through yet another window.
Yep.
And this is right at the end of the movie. It's like the last scene of the movie.
This movie also treats windows correctly. They don't break into a million pieces. They break into very, very sharp, pointy objects that stay in the window and also leave with you. So thank you for doing that. Even though it probably wasn't like, it was probably because of a safety thing that they couldn't actually get like that kind of tempered glass. So they just worked with what they had.
Yeah, I don't know how they accomplished that effect, but it looks real. And
it probably was a plastic that they had like pre-cut.
Yeah.
And then broke through.
Yeah,
that had to be
Yeah.
it, because there's no way they're pushing people through actual glass, because that's a great way to, get some arterial spray, if you know what
absolutely. I mean. If you didn't want blood in the movie, I mean, apparently she got cut a few times.
She did.
And both
in
like,
the
with
final
knife,
chase, you can definitely
literally.
see it.
Yeah, she's like really bleeding from like some of the bramble and stuff earlier in the
Hmm.
movie too. Um, but yeah, this final part of the movie, she's just running, and Leatherface and the hitchhiker are chasing her into the street. She runs into a truck driver,
Truck
who
driver
then
takes out James Franco.
yeah, truck driver takes out the hitchhiker. But she just tries to get in, and before he can like take off, like Leatherface is already there, and he's like sawing up his door and everything. So they run around, and he throws like a wrench at Leatherface and like knocks him out for a second.
Well, yeah, he hits him and then he runs away, and then eventually Sally gets picked up by another truck.
There's another
Can we talk
hitchhiker
about
or
can we talk
another
about the
guy.
truck driver who just kept running?
Oh yeah,
Like his truck is still there. I don't know where he was planning to go.
right. She just gets in the car, and she's another iconic shot from the film is just her in the
Leather
car looking back, covered in
Leatherface
blood.
like chasing him seems like a very iconic
Yeah,
shot.
Leatherface, and he's like dances, and it's just messed up, and then the
It's
movie
like
just
5 minutes
cuts
of
to
him
black.
dancing and then cut to black. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, oh, it's so good. Like, this is one of the most visceral and horrific horror films I think out there, and it's just because, like, the filmmaking, just is just so good for like what they're trying to do with it, and it's once again, it's absurd that he ever thought he was gonna get a PG rating for this movie. Like, I mean, like, come on. You know what you made here.
I will
This
agree
thing's gonna
that
mess
Kali
people up.
Ma is much worse than anything here, I'd say.
Like,
Just gore.
technically, but once, like, it's kind of has that effect though, because when you watch Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and you watch like nowadays, you remember it from your childhood of like this scene was horrible and
I
he
tell
like
you
reached
what,
into his
I
heart.
tell you what, the heart thing didn't freak me out as much as the monkey brain.
Oh
That
yeah.
was something else.
Well, that's the thing with the heart scene, though, is that it's a lot more like it edits kind of around the actual thing, both
Yeah.
because they literally can't do that. A human person can't reach into somebody and grab their heart, but also like it's not as bloody as you think it is. It's there's a little bit more implied there that just kind of seeps into your brain, which is what happened with this movie when this came out. Critics and people were calling it like a bloody, like like a blood-soaked horror fest basically, and that's just not the case. It's not bloody, but you kind of think about it that way,
I
where
think
it
if it wasn't based on like slaughtering so many animals and that kind of thing, and if it wasn't for
yeah,
the dinner scene, I could see that. I could see, well, because of those things, I can see what the critics and people were talking about. If you take away
yeah.
all those things and you just have the chainsaw scenes plus the meat hook thing, I I don't know. It's not very bloody.
No, it's really not. Even with the other scenes in there, it's like people talked about it like it was like a blood-soaked movie, just blood flying everywhere. That's how critics and stuff talked about it at the time. It got kind of a mixed reception. I think it was very controversial, obviously. I think that's
I
probably
noticed
why
that a
it's
lot of
not.
people on their first viewing like really don't like this movie.
Oh yeah, I mean it's messed up, and unless you're a specific horror fan, you're gonna hate
Ah,
this.
messed up. I don't care about.
Yeah, and like with like Hannah, like I did not watch this with Hannah because I told her I was like I don't think there's another movie that you'd hate more than this movie. There are movies that you'd hate as much, but this is it for how much you could hate something as far as movies go. So, uh, yeah, definitely not one for people who are in any way squeamish or averse to horror films.
And I didn't hate this movie. Honestly, all things considered, I can't really name another like slasher movie that I like more than this right now.
It's
So,
really, I mean,
yeah.
it really defined a whole
It's a low
subgenre
bar
of
for me
horror.
because I don't like slasher movies, but
Right.
like horror, if you think about horror movies, I don't care. If you want to call The Shining a horror movie, sure. I call it more of a thriller and a drama than a horror. A
I would say The
psychological
Shining
horror,
is a
sure.
horror. Yeah.
A psychological horror, sure. But I'd consider this more of a horror movie than that one.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. I still consider The Shining to be a
To
horror
me,
movie, but
to me, it's just my definition of horror. But my definition of horror means inherently that writing takes a backseat to visuals. So to me, The Shining is less of a horror movie because it's better written than like what I would think of as a horror movie. If that
interesting.
kind of makes sense.
I mean, I do think horror is more based in its visuals and cinematography than most like other genres are inherently, but I
No one's looking to
don't.
horror
Yeah,
for they'll look to horror for iconic characters. They won't look to them for like strong written characters or strong like acted characters.
yeah. I mean, but you get things like Alien that kind of break that mold. I think
Again, it
and
just feel I get that it has like horror aspects, especially like that sci-fi horror kind of thing. It feels more of a thriller to me
okay.
because in my mind those are two with some overlap. Those are two like distinct
I mean,
things.
broadly, if we're talking about
Broad
just
strokes,
genre,
if we're talking
I
about
think.
horror genre, that covers a lot of movies if you're
Well,
considering like Alien and this to be in like that horror genre.
okay, well, what I think about it, I guess, is think about your protagonist in the movie and what is the primary emotion that they're experiencing throughout the movie. If it is fear,
If
I
it's
consider it to be a horror movie.
interesting, that covers a lot of movies.
It does. I think horror is a very broad genre, but
Okay, is
I
the
think
Mark Wahlberg Deepwater Horizon, is that a horror movie?
no.
I'm pretty
I'm
sure
not.
he
I'm
was
not.
fearful when he was in the middle of the ocean, like with his like only vessel on fire.
Well, I'm not trying to be so broad with it that it's like that. I'm not saying that, but if it's like something that, like The Shining, I mean, Shelley Duvall's character, the whole movie is absolutely terrified. Like it's not Deepwater Horizon is like he still has to get stuff done and like he's still like he's concerned about other things and
Well, so does
it's
Ripley.
yeah. I mean, I guess that's true, but it's still more steeped in the fear though of it. It kind of plays up the fear.
So is she not also totally fearful in Aliens? Is
I mean,
Aliens also a horror?
Aliens is kind of a horror action hybrid. Aliens is more of an action movie though, I would say.
See, horror action hybrid is what I would consider to be like a horror thriller, though.
Yeah, I mean horror thrillers are a common combination genre. But I mean it's really everybody can have their own definition and it's yeah, I mean not really too concerned about it. For me though,
Actually,
it's like am I putting a scream on the opening for this video or not? Yes, I am. So if we did Alien or The
well, it's
Shining, would I put the
that's
scream?
not that's
Yeah, I
not what I'm
would.
saying. You can put you. I'm putting the scream on Crash. All right.
Well, that is a horror film in an
That
entirely
is
different way.
absolutely a horror film.
But yeah, either
See,
way
horror
though,
films,
this
broad strokes,
whatever
covers
the
basically
situation
everything.
is, we're both in agreement that this is definitively a horror
This
film
is
through and
definitively a
through.
horror film.
And there's no questions about that.
Absolutely
It's
not.
what it has to offer is the fear and the terror of this
Oh,
specific situation.
this is Wikipedia, but they say that the film genre of horror seeks to elicit fear or disgust in its audience
Yeah.
specifically.
Yes. That too. Like that's kind of also the main thing too.
Okay,
So it also comes down to some people will say something's not a horror film because they weren't scared of it, and I'm like, I don't know, but generally it's viewed as scary. So
cool. So Velma is a horror TV show because it definitely gave me disgust.
no, I didn't even watch it, so I can't speak to
Don't
it.
worry, I
But I
did.
didn't,
Don't watch
I
it.
didn't hear good things. Yeah, enough people watched it for it to get a season 2. So
Wait, it got a
either way,
season 2?
oh yeah, because people watched it because
Oh my
people
god.
kind of hate watched it, I think. But yeah, this is a really fascinating kind of film because it's it's bizarrely well, like I said, it's kind of that mixture of just all of these different things, both in the real world and in the world of film, and the changing kind of tide, the new wave of directors really coming in the late 60s and the 70s. That's when you have just so many iconic filmmakers coming into their own and kind of getting to work in a system that's newly refreshed because of this new rating system and
It is that like Hitchcock going out, everyone else coming in type
yes,
thing.
Hitchcock is in the past, Orson Welles is the past, but now you get
Everybody's running over the
Scorsese.
body of
Yeah.
Hitchcock as he paved the way.
Now you get Scorsese and Spielberg and
He was a
all
large
of
man,
these
so they had to do
guys.
quite a bit of a jump, but,
Yeah, William Friedkin. You get so many just like iconic films. Sidney Lumet, who we've talked about several
Hmm.
times,
So
with Network and
sometimes
everything, or several times with like Network, and I brought up Serpico and some other
I brought
stuff
up
from the
12 Angry
70s.
Men, so
Yeah, 12 Angry Men. Yeah, just like you get these filmmakers who are just kind of, and Toby Hooper, uh, people like him coming in, John Carpenter, and kind of just redefining what film is. And this is one of the most definitive redefinings of an entire genre, both in terms of its marketability, the way that they are made budgetarily, and the way that people accept them, and stylistically, character tropes, all of these things are just like absolutely cemented by this movie and evolved and played with from it.
the thing
It
I'll
also
add with
has,
character tropes is this is pretty tame on character tropes, but
yes,
I think that's just because character tropes for horror movies weren't established yet. So it's kind of funny to see how everyone butchered all the character tropes for slasher movies, even though this movie, which is definitively the slasher movie, has very few.
yeah, I
It's
mean,
kind of
like
funny to me.
you watch something like Friday the 13th and you
You
get,
watch something like Scream, you watch something, yeah,
yeah, which Scream is obviously directly playing off the tropes in a way that after they've already been firmly established by the entire genre for years,
yeah.
Scream can then play off of that. Whereas
They
like
they
Friday the
bring up the
13th,
tropes during that movie.
yeah, Friday the 13th is taking something, inspiration from something like this, and increasing the more exploitative aspects of it, like the stalker style killer, slowly moving through his prey throughout an entire film, kind of really just drawing it out, like the more deranged side of the horror stuff. Like this movie, once it gets to the horror stuff, it just gets to it. Like we said, it just knocks out like four people right away, and then it's just one girl being chased and tormented for the rest of the movie.
Hmm.
And other movies, like others, especially slashers, will like really kind of draw out the whole like one person at a time getting taken out for the duration of the film.
Yeah, the only
And
reason I know the characters' names is because they screamed them out for a
yeah,
solid 20 minutes of the movie.
yeah,
That's the only
they,
reason I know their names. Otherwise,
they
they
say
would
their
just
names a
be
lot. Yeah,
first dead, second dead, third dead, fourth dead, and Sally. That would be
yeah,
it.
yeah. But I mean, this movie, and critically, like I said, it had mixed reviews, but over the years, it's only hailed as one of an all-time classics. Even people like Tarantino call it recently uh one of the very few perfect movies ever made. And I mean, take that as you will. Tarantino is clearly prone to grindhouse style
I
stuff,
have
but
called a few movies like perfectly made, so I would believe that he would say this, and I'd say it's pretty close to what I'd consider a perfectly made movie.
yeah, like
Uh,
for like genre specificity within the context of a movie
yeah,
like this,
absolutely. Of what
absolutely,
I think of the horror genre, absolutely. This is very close to the perfect horror movie.
yeah. I mean, it really like it. You don't like you get into like the script and stuff, which we can talk about the scoring in a minute, but
Hmm.
so like it's not that involved, there's not a lot going on here, but I mean there's still a lot thematically kind of happening within the context of the situation, with this is, I would say, in the vein of a Southern Gothic film, which we talked about Night of the Hunter, which is kind of one of the staples of the Southern class or Southern Gothic genre, like
Oh,
subgenre,
you brought it up
subclass.
earlier. Is this in the film
Yeah.
registry?
This is not in the film registry. I think due to its controversial nature. I think it'll be there at some point though.
Yeah, sure.
But I think it's a little bit too gruesome, I think, because movies like
Again, I
Halloween are in
also
the
just
National
think,
Film Registry.
as of right now, what it represents, the film registry is just a little pretentious.
I mean, yeah, it's just kind of a symbolic thing. It's a little
It definitely
pretentious, and
is.
I think something that's so grindhouse like this isn't going to get in there for a little bit, even with it being so influential and such a classic.
And
But
also 50 years old.
yep, definitely old enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think it has some interesting things to say about human nature and kind of the idea. Like, apparently, a lot of people became vegetarians and vegans after this. Even people like Guillermo del Toro cite this as why he became a vegetarian.
Toby Hooper became a vegetarian for quite a while.
Yeah, a lot of people did after watching this movie because it does highlight kind of the slaughterhouse like of like cows and mistreatment of like animals, and then
If it
also
tells you
the
all you need to know, I had a burger
yeah.
after watching this movie.
Oh, same. I actually almost got barbecue, but then I found out it was
Ooh,
National
yeah.
Cheeseburger Day, so
Good old
I got a
dry rub.
cheeseburger
Oh,
instead.
yes. Yeah.
um, so yeah, I got a cheeseburger instead. But
Heavily
yeah,
marinated dry rub. That's what I'm feeling after this movie.
absolutely. Like it's disgusting, and I feel gross watching them eat the human flesh. But at the same time, I'm not the type
If
of
you want to
person
turn
whose
into a
stomach.
vegetarian, watch Food Nation.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm not the type of person whose stomach gets so churned by like that stuff that I can't eat. I could eat a barbecue sandwich while watching this movie, and I
Yeah.
wouldn't be phased by it, but I would still be
I
disgusted by
think
what's
me too.
happening.
I brought up the aphantasia. The whole point is, so like I get very squeamish about my own blood or somebody else's blood, but not in movies.
Interesting,
it's just not the case. It's very easy for me to tell that it's not real.
right? Even when sometimes it is.
Even when sometimes it is. It's purely that like movie thing.
Right.
I've been like force fed, oh, this is fake for 27 years of my
This, yeah,
life. So yeah, it's gonna take a lot for me to it's gonna take like a documentary-esque thing to for me to be like, okay, maybe this is real.
yeah.
I'll tell you what, was it Enter the Void? Did that for me.
I haven't seen that one, but
Enter the Void?
yeah,
Is it Into the Void or Into the
I don't
I
know.
messed this up
There's
so many
probably
times.
multiple movies with those names. So, all right.
Enter the Void,
Well, okay, that came out like a few years ago, right?
2009.
Okay, 2009. Okay.
Yes, we're old. It
Well,
was 14 years ago.
anything else you want to talk about with the main discussion here? Or do you want to get into the
I
scoring?
felt like I had something to say, but I could say it during the scoring if I remember it.
All right. Well, going into the scoring, as usual, we have a 10 categories: writing, world building, characters, directing, acting, visuals, editing, sound, genre, in this case horror, and then impact. And we rate those on a scale of 0 to 2, 0 being anything that we would consider not good, 1 being good, and 2 being great. So, starting off, writing. So, I know that you kind of, I'm not going to say that this is like the absolute strongest writing in
It's
the
tough for me
world.
because every week we have multiple genres every other week, so we have to balance writing within those genres and that kind of thing.
Right.
I said before, horror has a tendency, I won't say it always, but it has a
Yeah.
tendency to sacrifice writing for other things. I'd say
It's more about the visuals.
a movie like Cabin in the Woods for me, if we're talking horror writing, would get a 2 from me.
Or like
Because
Get Out.
or like Get Out. Get Out's a good example of that. That kind of thing. The Shining would probably get a 2 for me. I would have to watch it again. I haven't seen it in years. That kind of thing. I can't call this a 2, and it's tough for me to call this a 1 if it is a 1 because the
I'd call it.
dialogue is very, very mixed bag. I can't conceive of many good lines that I like from this movie, and the pacing overall, I know it's a horror movie, pacing can be weird. The first 35 minutes are slow, like too, just a little bit too slow, because it
Yeah,
was
I mean,
35 minutes in before the action and everything hits the ground running, but because it took so long to hit the ground running, it felt like it couldn't breathe after that, which is fine for a horror movie, but not really that great for for a script.
I guess my perspective on this is that is this one of the all-time scripts to be studied? Absolutely not. But is this writing for this movie perfect for what the movie is? Yes. So I'm not going to say that I could give it a
I'm not gonna
2.
say perfect.
I think, but for what this movie is, I still think that the writing and everything is, it is uniquely structured. It is put together in a way, and the like it feels all very authentic. Um, even when even if something doesn't quite gel or feels a little, out of place, or the line isn't necessarily great, it all
When you
feels
when
pretty
you say
authentic still.
authentic, does are you saying that like the characters seem authentic? Because I disagree vehemently.
I'm not even saying well, I think that, okay, it depends on the characters we're talking about. Because if we're talking about like the family, then yeah, they feel pretty authentic to me.
No,
But if we're talking about like um, the young adults who
yes.
get murdered, the victims in this case, I
That's
mean,
what they
they're
are.
pretty
They're
stock.
victims. They're
Yeah,
literally nothing burgers.
their
By the
characters are
end
just
they are
victims.
nothing
Yeah,
burgers. You like
yeah,
that? You like that double meaning?
yeah. But it kind of makes it, the fact that they're kind of nothing kind of makes it anybody, like they're I forgot to mention, they're like, I like the aspect too that they are into the whole like hippie stuff. They're into astrology, they're talking about all this stuff in the car, and it kind of, it really shows that they're completely just out of their element, like from the beginning of the movie you can just tell, like, maybe these people are from here but they're not from here anymore, and you get a sense that they are so naive to where they are, like not understanding the, anything culturally, or just, so they act in a way that doesn't, that leaves them susceptible to becoming the victims that they do become.
Well, it
And
doesn't
I
really
think
go
that that's
into the culture as much as just it's just fish out of water
right, but
when it comes to
I still think it's smart setup for characters like this within this context. It makes it believable that they would kind of be a little ignorant of, like, just trespassing on somebody's house in Texas, which is still kind of a thing. Like, you don't want to just walk into somebody's house in Texas, you'll probably get shot, is kind of still the assumption to this day. So, I don't know. I still feel like,
another reason I don't like slasher movies, because that's kind of like a begging the question type thing of like we need we need these people to break and enter. Just have them break and enter. That's
yeah,
it's just a thing that they just have them do. It was kind of whether it was started with this movie or not, it's a thing that slasher movies and horror movies do generally, is just a contrivance of we need them to be in this spot at a certain time. Oh, just have them do it, whether or not it's in character.
yeah.
So it's bad writing.
Well, to me in this case though, I think it works. I think that in the future they take it and go too far with it and make it really stupid. And this movie doesn't feel like so stupid to me. It feels like these
It feels
characters
very
would do
stupid to me.
this. Maybe it is dumb overall, but like it's still, like, it doesn't, ultimately it's a dumb decision what they did, and maybe they shouldn't have acted in the same way that they did. But I believe that these characters would do that. And I believe that, I mean, it doesn't feel like
You
the
believe that they would
most
do something
insane
stupid
situation.
because they are written to be dumb.
They're written to be ignorant. I don't think they're completely stupid, but they're ignorant and they don't get the time to prove themselves otherwise because they'll get killed so quickly. I would still
that's
give this a
also
one.
not,
Is all,
that's
all I'm
also
saying.
not a benefit to the writing.
Look, look, I'm
Look,
still
they
like,
they
look,
didn't get a chance to defend themselves because they died off too quickly. Is a
but I'm saying that that is perfect still for the type of movie that if they were any more fleshed out, then this movie's horror wouldn't work as well. I don't think.
but
I don't need to know these characters. I don't need to know their motivations. I don't need to
you're
know that
forgetting
the everyman
the thing that you're
aspect of it.
forgetting is this is not a horror movie podcast. If it was, this would be a 2. But I gave Darkman a 0 because because the script, because the writing, because the dialogue made no sense. Whatever you want to call that.
I
We
feel
give
pretty firmly about a one here. I'm not trying to push you to a two, but I feel pretty strongly about still giving it a one. So how
we
do you want to settle this?
we can put a 1 down and then I might revisit it later.
Okay. World building. So world building is interesting because it's so small scale in terms of its locations.
Yeah.
Um, it's very sparse. You basically just have the road, and you have a brief scene earlier with some just Texas folk lying around, and then you have the gas station with the barbecue, and then you
So I'm
get
going to bring up
their
something
old
that we
house.
haven't talked about yet. we
Yeah.
didn't bring up the introduction other than the narration. We didn't bring up the long. It felt like 5 minutes worth of the dis disembodied and uh like manipulated corpse on the statue, which I'm
Yeah.
gonna be honest, great shot. It grossed me out for 5 minutes, but great shot. Um,
Yeah, it's gross, but
but
it's a good shot.
also during that is like a radio show playing the news.
Yes, that's
So
right.
yeah, it gets to that. It talks about everything like that, and honestly, something that's pretty apropos for our network um, episode when it comes to just sensationalism of terrible things happening. Which that's not just network; it's literally real life does that to this day. Um, what I don't like is the fact that nothing comes of that. Nothing comes of the opening narration where it kind of feels like a real life story. Um, and I think that's because the characters are so poorly written. Nothing comes from the corpse on the statue, the cemetery, and the radio show. So this movie was trying to build something in the first 5 minutes that I found pretty. I was hooked, and then nothing came from it.
I mean, it's just kind of, I think that's playing off of the real world stuff that with the serial killers, the Ed Gein situation, um, stuff like that. Somebody like grave robbing for corpse parts and stuff, which is addressed later in the movie, just briefly, just somebody grave robbing like one of the family members, if not Leatherface himself. I can't remember, but yeah, and then the radio show stuff in the background too. Once again, just kind of setting
It
up
feels out of
and
place if you knew the rest of this movie, you'd be like, "What? Why did they put that in there?"
I think it's just for the sake of like this is where they are and this place is like it's really that's kind of goes into the almost the exploitation aspect of this movie of
You're going to
just
have
these.
to define that word for me. I have no idea what
So
that means.
basically, I mean, it's an exploitation film, in that exploitation films are anything that
Did
takes
you
a
say
certain
hexploitation?
exploitation, but I said
Oh, I heard.
exploitation earlier because it's
Again, define that.
okay. So I was just about to define just an exploitation film in general is anything that takes any kind of subgenre and kind of ramps up its stereotypical aspects and usually plays it either comedically or in this case for horror it plays up it in an almost genre stylistic kind of way.
Well, wouldn't
The
this be the opposite of that because there was basically nothing before this?
what do you mean?
Like, if we're talking about something that plays up the genre, there's not really anything
Oh,
before this.
yeah, this kind of helped establish this kind of redneck horror though that didn't really exist in the same kind of way beforehand with kind of the southern gothic flavor in there too, but um I would I mean that's what I'm saying though with like it's playing up that the people around here they're rednecks and there's also it's almost just like this brutal almost hellscape that it's kind of setting up at the beginning
Well,
and
that's
it's
just
just rural
Texas. I agree
Texas.
with that.
Right, but it's just rural Texas and it's playing into those kind of stereotypes and especially given the time that it came out with like we said the serial killers and other stuff like the Ed Gein situation in Texas making furniture out of body parts and whatnot and just stuff like that being in the world. I think it's and it playing off of the fact that I mean it's not actually a true story but saying it's a true story kind of thing.
Sure,
And it's
I
just
get you.
all it's just setting the scene in that kind of context. So all of that to me is just context for the world that the film is in, which is hypothetically our world, but it's playing up the horrors of our world to its maximum extent that it can.
I will
And
I will
yeah.
always say that if you are going to have a smaller world than you deem to be necessary, it gives you an advantage on how you build that world.
Yes.
So I will give this a strong one.
Yes, I agree. It's a one. I don't think that they like. There's not so much going on here that I'm like, I want to see all the sequels to this. You know,
Well,
it's more
it's
like
not just
an
that.
isolated
It
incident.
feels like
Yeah.
there was other than a little bit of like Leatherface and Sawyer family character building, there was no reason to have the slaughterhouse in the beginning, other
I
than
mean,
to
other
build up
than
the Sawyer family.
right, but it is about that though. So like once again, it's such a
Sure,
short
but
movie that
it feels out of place to just have like a 5 minute scene talking about that when it could have been set in the slaughterhouse, or it could have been set like next to the slaughterhouse, like right
I
next to
mean,
it.
I that's it's just kind of one of those things though. It works for me for what they're doing with it. I'm not gonna say that it's not like the Saw universe where every like thing is connected and
I don't
everything
want to
is
talk about the Saw universe when it
bleeding
comes to
into
world
each
building.
other, you know, and
That's
the
not good
whole
world
world.
building. That's
I'm
something
not saying
else.
it is either, but it's not like but at least in the like this one doesn't make me like be like I gotta see more of what's going on here, you know. It's more like the horrors of this specific encounter. So it works for world building, but yeah, I'm not gonna try to push for a two here either. All right, characters. Characters you said pretty strongly that you feel like it's a zero.
The few things that I like are the Sawyer family, and even still, it's very one dimensional.
They're one dimensional, but in a way, I wouldn't even say that though.
I would say they are absolutely one dimensional. The only one that I would say isn't is the father or older brother. I don't know his name
I feel like
because
Leatherface himself is kind of a fascinating thing with the three different masks that he
he's
wears
sure
and
he's
the makeup and like kind of filling this weird family role.
in one scene he sounds exactly like Mrs. Doubtfire, which was and looked like Mrs. Doubtfire, which was really
Yeah,
weird to me. Um, like that stirred up random
but like
childhood
yeah, but it
memories.
was like why was he dressing up as a woman and like setting the table and everything and like it felt like a very southern mentality kind of situation where he's like filling a role that doesn't exist for them but also is like childlike mind somehow like I don't he's terrifying because he's confusing and in strange ways contradictory, you know, and
It's just another reason why I don't like horror movies, because I would like to see more of Leatherface, but we only
mm,
got so much in the actual movie. And I would like to see more of the Sawyer family. I would like to see more of crazy, like 120-year-old grandpa. But what we got
well,
was 5 minutes of it.
apparently in the sequel
I'm
to
not
this,
going to
which I've
watch the
never seen,
sequels because I
the
can't
sequel
imagine they're as good as this.
okay, the first sequel has kind of an interesting angle to it where Toby Hooper actually came back and directed the sequel in 1986, so years later.
God, 12
And
years later. Wow.
yeah, and that was the first sequel. They went 12 years without a sequel. um so this movie didn't start like horror sequelization and serialization. That was kind of more the Halloween's and Friday the 13th movies.
Not
But
surprising due to the, mafia money laundering, even though it made $30
right.
million. dollars. Can't imagine it's very easy to get a sequel when it's held hostage.
Well, and when it's like banned in so many places and so controversial.
That's true.
But yeah, once they did do it, they kind of did it as like a parody, and Dennis Hopper's in it, and it's kind of like there's the family dynamic. I don't know a lot about it because I haven't seen it, obviously, but like it's a strange departure from what the first movie is. I don't know. So if you want to see more of the family, though, maybe the second one is good to watch for that.
That here's the thing. I want to see more of this family. I don't want to see more of like butchered sequel family that
Right.
it,
Okay, for me, the characters.
characters rarely work in sequels the way that they are intended and the way that they should have been. So
Yeah,
it's very difficult for me to go back and watch this movie after having
yeah,
not
and I
watched it
mean,
prior.
and I'm just trying to talk about when we talk about context too. I want to talk about like the context within this film and the type of
Yeah,
film that it is.
just the film.
And I feel like once again, I'm not going to try to argue for a two with characters, but I don't mind that the victims are basically just victims. I think that they're just given enough characterization to exist and be people, and then they are victims. But the anonymity of them, the fact that you don't really know a lot about them, and then they're just murdered so quickly, just kind of puts in this kind of stark reality to it that makes it feel more real and more horrifying. And kind of makes it in anybody's situation. And then I do think the family is super interesting. Not, once again, not like the most fleshed out thing in the world or anything, because there is this huge mystery, like why is this even happening? And you don't get those answers. You just experience the horror of it.
So
And so
this is definitely a growing pain because of the fact that this is a different movie. The way that it's written for a horror movie specifically is different than any movie that we've gone over before.
yes,
Other than
that's
say
true.
Pitch Black, which we gave 0 on many a thing. So
I
and
almost
Dark
wish
Man, which we also gave 0 on many a thing. So it's
I
very
feel like
difficult for me to
yeah.
like stretch out and give leniency to this movie when we didn't for Dark Man or we didn't for Pitch Black.
I think within
That's
the
my
context
concern.
I think within the context of this type of movie, once again, I'm not going to push for a 2 because I'm not trying to like say that it's better than like or as good as
I'm
Network
actually
and
leaning
everything.
towards a 1. It's
But
just that
I feel good about a 1 on it. Yeah.
it's
Because
we'll just
like
have to wait and see.
yeah, so we'll just put a 1 for now there.
Mhm.
But I
Not
think
for
I
this. I mean, like for the next horror movie we do.
oh, for the see, I have thoughts about that. Depending on how this one went, I wanted to like maybe do something that kind of highlighted all of the things that are wrong about the things that evolved out of this.
Hmm.
And kind of highlight just how good this one is in comparison. But all right, directing. I feel pretty strongly
Directing's
about
a
a
2.
2. Yeah, directing's a 2.
Direct
This is
Directing's a 2.
not just yeah, this is just not just like a great directorial effort from Toby Hooper. It is one of his his 2 best films for sure, this and Poltergeist. And he just he kills it for what the movie is. Like it's really great
I will say this, I
filmmaking.
think you will be pleasantly surprised for what I have to say aside for one category.
Mm, yeah. All right, so directing's a 2. Acting.
So
Acting
I
is
I I I strongly believe this is a 2 because of the shit that they had to pull through.
Yes.
And the fact that say what you want about the victims, their acting is subpar in the first 35 minutes, but everyone else's acting throughout is
Yes.
superb.
The family, incredible.
Yeah,
Sally, when she's
absolutely
having to
incredible.
play the victim in the second half of this
Yeah.
movie, there was a critic at the time that said she should deserve like a special Academy Award just for this.
Not just that. When we lump her together with the other victims, that's a great disservice to her.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No,
They
she's
are
not
the
a victim.
victim.
She's a
Yeah, they
survivor.
well, survivors can be victims, but
Right.
it's
She
a
threw herself
different
through
kind
2
of
windows to get out of here.
semantic
Though, so.
argument.
Right.
Twice. 2 times.
But yeah, she's so good just like playing this, and she's just I mean to scream act like that throughout the like whole part of this movie, like the
Yeah.
last half of this movie. Oh my gosh.
Which
It's a
given the
lot.
filming, that was real.
Oh my gosh.
That was real. That wasn't
Yeah,
acting.
especially the dinner scene. Oh,
Ah, shoot. I should have made the joke. It's a 0. No one was acting. They were just real. Ah, man. That would have
yeah.
been funny.
All right. So visuals. I think visuals is clearly a 2 here.
Strong 2.
Strong 2.
Very,
Like,
very strong 2. Some of the best cinematography
absolutely.
I've seen in a movie that's $150,000 budget. Is
Yeah, and this
insane.
is the kind of I mean, and it's using
I
its
didn't bring
budget
it up.
extremely well.
Uh,
What?
Father Sawyer brings Sally into the truck, and it's a dolly zoom into the truck and then back out of the truck. That's like some things I've only seen in like Baby Driver has a shot like that where
Mm,
Ansel Elgort goes through the van
yeah.
as he's running away or during one of the chase scenes, and the dolly follows him through the van and then out. It does that and then does a very sneaky shot where it's a very clear shot but only for a frame did I notice it. And then so it's connecting those 2 long shots, but the dolly stays the same.
Mm,
And I can't
yeah.
imagine how difficult it was to keep that camera in the exact same spot for however many takes they had to do for that.
Right.
So that is impeccable cinematography. Not even mentioning the very good long shots of the van leaving the gas station for the first time. It's just a very long, tense shot for no reason, probably because of budgetary constraints. probably because it was just cool looking, but it was definitely cool looking. So
Yeah.
all those cool long shots, love it. It's good
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, it is good stuff. All right. I, this one might be the controversial one you're talking about
Not
because
necessarily because I will argue for a one.
I will argue for a strong two in the editing. I
It's
think
going to
this
be
is
a
a
huge difference to me
I
because
think that's a superbly edited, immaculately edited movie. This is a perfect like example of using editing to heighten the horror to me throughout the whole film. But you said
I think it's more
specifically it
so
took you out of some
cinematography.
scenes.
There are several instances, and this is in the action sequences, but even still, it's weirdly edited for the first 35 minutes, and some of the choices for the cuts don't make sense to me, and it feels like they just merged cuts over and over again, or merged shots like the same shots over and over again, and it just feels off. It doesn't feel like off in horror fashion to me. It feels off.
I
So
don't know. To me, it feels like it works for the horror of it for me just right. I remember watching this for the first time with some people. It was their pick to watch it, and just immediately there's like from the second the movie started, he was just like, "Oh, it's so good." And I just kind of laughed. I was like, "It's like the movie hasn't even like gotten anywhere yet," but I was just so hooked in immediately just from like everything that was happening with it, and the editing included. Uh, and it's hard when like it's so much daylight stuff too. You know, this is a sun-soaked horror movie, and I don't know. There's just kind of this fractured quality to the editing that I think really for me just heightens the whole experience. So I feel really strongly about it being a two.
hmm, I feel very strongly about it being a one.
All right, we'll circle back to editing.
Okay.
Sound.
I don't know how we're gonna deal with it though.
I don't know either. We'll get to it. All right, sound. Sound is extremely unique in this movie. The lack of score is distinct,
Well, there is a
but like
score. It's a very weird score.
it's they use some licensed tracks occasionally, but for the most part, there's not a lot of score. There's just kind of like animal sounds and kind of other weird, just kind of sound effects. For some people, this might not work for them, but I think it really works for the tone of the movie. So I personally think those unique sound choices push this to a two for me in sound.
It definitely works for the horror aspects. I hate that horror uses these things as a crutch for good film
I
making.
think that there are plenty of examples of horror movies that use this as a crutch. I think that this movie is using it
I wasn't
to
saying that for this
amplify.
movie specifically,
Yeah,
but I'm
because I
just
agree that
saying
other
that
ones do.
give it a 2.
Okay. All right, the horror aspect of this movie for the genre. I think that this is an all-timer. I
It's a
feel like it's
2,
an
move
easy
on.
two. Impact is two. There are very few movies that have had this kind. This is one of those movies, like within its specific genre, is about as influential as you get.
Yeah.
So easy two. So the only one to go back to is the editing,
Mhm.
which I think for you and me, it's really just a matter of is it a one or a two,
Mhm.
and I would argue for a strong two, you strong one. Um, because we're in an agree to disagree situation, and you're still arguing for a
Yeah, what
positive
happens now?
score, and you're still arguing for a positive score, I'll give you the one on editing, just because you're still saying it's good, but
Yeah.
you're not trying to convince me for a zero. So
Yeah, that's the awkward thing about 0 being poor and 1 being good because there's no neutral in this case. Whereas
right,
the one in the middle would be neutral. We don't really have that. So each and every point that a movie gets matters a whole lot. Like each
yeah.
and every point in each and every category means a whole lot for this scoring.
So that puts this one at 16 out of 20 for the total
8
for
out of 10.
the for yeah 8 out of 10. I mean it's a great horror film. It's one of the all-time best.
Hmm.
Um, which that comes with certain like if we're talking about the grand scheme of filmmaking as a whole, like it has certain asterisks to it, but I don't know, like talking about things in context, this is just an all-timer. And if you're a horror fan and you haven't seen this, definitely seek it out. I mean, I don't know what you're doing if you haven't watched it yet. I'm a recent horror fan, just in the last 5 to 7 years, really getting into it. So,
I was a huge horror fan in middle school and first couple of years of high school because it was
really,
kind of, well, no, it was purely because it was like a cool thing. You
oh
were
yeah,
so cool if you could withstand horror and like be super chill about it. But I liked the comedy of it all because they didn't scare me as much as they just made me laugh most of the time.
yeah. When most horror films kind of fall into two camps of either being bad and funny or good and scary, and the good and scary are a little bit fewer and farther between, I think.
Also, can we
But
talk about a misnomer? Only one chainsaw death, two by hammer, one by freezer, and one
absolutely,
by truck. This should be called the Texas Hammer Massacre. Come on,
yeah. I
that was
mean,
that was a joke.
I think chainsaw sounds a little better for marketing's sake,
Definitely
but
does. They just had to add the Texas. They just had to make fun of Texas.
I mean, it's all set in Texas,
It is
and
set in Texas.
I think people can pick on Texas a little bit.
I think people should.
If you're from Texas, I'm sorry.
If you're from Texas, I am not sorry. You knew what was gonna happen.
Yeah.
So this is our first,
I mean, but Toby Hooper's a Texas. He's from Texas. He's a Texas filmmaker.
and he
So
made
I
fun
mean,
of
like,
Texas. So there you go.
yeah, he was basing it off of
One of
his own
y'all has a good sense of
experiences.
humor.
All right, so that'll do it for this discussion for Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original. And yeah, Kyle, what do you have for us next
So
week?
I have some thoughts about this.
Okay,
If we're keeping it in the horror genre, which I kind of wanted to do,
okay,
I wanted to go with somebody who I've seen quite a few horror movies or horror-esque movies from. I went with the man, the myth, El Diablo, Guillermo del Toro.
oh,
I'm not doing the one that you're thinking.
okay. I've
I'm
seen
not even
all of his
doing the other
movies.
one that you're thinking. I'm not even
I'm
doing the third or fourth one that you're thinking. We're
the first one that
watching.
I'm thinking of, The Devil's Backbone. Is that it?
Absolutely not.
Oh, okay,
It's not even the second, third, or fourth. I promise you that.
okay. What is it?
We're watching Blade 2.
Oh my gosh. You know what? That's actually great because when I watched all of his movies a few years ago, like I think
Oh, I
last
bet
year
you
actually.
love Blade 2.
Well, I actually had already watched Blade 2, so I didn't watch it last year. So it's been like 3 years since I watched it.
Oh, cool.
So
Man, it
I
has
didn't
been
like it's not
20
like
years.
in my mind. Yeah.
It has been a while.
Yeah,
We're
I like Blade 2.
we're actually
I mean,
watching the OG MCU with
oh
with
yeah,
David
absolutely.
Hasselhoff as Nick Fury MCU.
Man, you said screw Blade. We're gonna go straight to Blade 2.
Well, no, it's not only that. It's I think this is our first case of a repeat writer. We haven't had a repeat director, I don't believe. We've
No,
had
we have not.
several repeat actors, Keith David and Vin Diesel being two. This is the case of David S. Goyer coming back for the second time.
Right. I forgot that he was involved in that.
He was involved in this, and he was involved in Batman Begins.
Yep. Yep. I forgot about that. But
Mhm.
yeah. Well,
Also, I love
I
me some
mean,
Ron Perlman. So
absolutely. I mean, I'm all about it. Yeah. I think I watched all the Blade movies, not even when I lived here. So it's probably like 4 years ago
yeah,
that I watched them all.
it's been
So,
better part of 20 years since I've seen this movie.
oh, yeah. I liked Blade too. I have issues with it, but we'll get into that next week.
Let's get into it.
Yeah, so that does it for this week on the Great American Movie Review. We have new episodes every single Thursday, so be sure to come back next week and check us out if you like what we're talking about. Also, we're available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you like us in your audio format, take us on the go.
Under the same name.
Under the same name, Great American Movie Review. All right, see you at the movies.